The stars looked different from the bridge of the UES horizon. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck, watching as alien ships moved through space like nothing he had ever seen before. Their hulls gleamed with strange metals that seemed to bend light around them. Some ships looked like giant flowers made of crystal. Others moved like living creatures, pulsing with soft blue light. "Sir, we're getting the final docking instructions," said Lieutenant Pete Davis from the communication station. His voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that Jake felt in his own chest. "Put it on the main screen," Jake replied. The view screen flickered to life, showing a being that looked almost human, but not quite. Its skin had a pale blue tint, and its eyes were too large for its face. When it spoke, the words came through the universal translator in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "Welcome, humans of Earth. I am Council Speaker Zethka of the Galactic Confederation. Your species has been granted provisional membership status. Please follow the escort ships to Zenturi Prime." Jake nodded to his crew. "You heard them. Take us in." As the horizon moved toward the massive space station that orbited the alien homeworld, Jake thought about how long humanity had dreamed of this moment. First contact. The day Earth would join the galactic community. Politicians back home called it humanity's greatest achievement. But Jake had read the reports from the advanced scouts, and something bothered him about the way the aliens looked at humans. They called Earth a death world. Jake still didn't understand what that meant. 3 hours later, Ambassador Lisa Hayes stepped off the shuttle onto the docking platform of Zenturi Prime. The air smelled like flowers and something she couldn't identify. The gravity felt lighter, and Earth normal, making each step feel like a small bounce. "Ambassador Hayes," said a tall figure approaching her delegation. This alien looked like a person made of living crystal, with faceted skin that threw rainbows across the platform. "I am First Minister Velsari of the Volani Republic. We are honored to welcome your species to the Confederation." Lisa bowed slightly, the way the briefings had taught her. "Thank you, First Minister. We're grateful for this opportunity. Please follow me to the welcome ceremonies. The other species representatives are eager to meet you." As they walked through corridors that seemed grown rather than built, Lisa noticed how the aliens moved. They glided rather than walked. Their voices never rose above a gentle murmur. Everything about this place spoke of peace and gentleness. The ceremony hall was enormous, with a dome that showed the stars above. Hundreds of different alien species filled the space. Lisa saw beings that looked like giant insects with jeweled shells. Others floated in transparent bubbles filled with glowing gas. Some had too many arms, others had no arms at all, but they all had one thing in common. When they looked at the human delegation, their expressions changed. Some showed curiosity. Others showed something that looked like pity. Captain Ben Carter stood in the military section of the ceremony, wearing his dress uniform. He had fought in the water wars back on Earth, where cities went to battle over drinking supplies. He had seen what humans could do when they had to survive. Next to him stood a Krax warrior, if you could call it that. The insect-like being carried what looked like a weapon, but Carter could see it was designed to stun, not kill. The armor was decorative rather than protective. Everything about the Krax's equipment suggested they had never faced a real enemy. "Your species comes from a harsh world," the Krax clicked through its translator. "We have read the reports. Storms that can destroy cities, earthquakes that split continents. How did you survive such a place?" "We adapted," Carter said simply. "Fascinating. Most species that evolve on such worlds either die out or become too aggressive for civilized society. Your species seems to have found a middle path." Carter said nothing, but he wondered what the Krax meant by too aggressive. He had seen the Confederation's military demonstrations earlier. Their idea of warfare looked more like a game with rules than actual combat. Dr. Amy Richardson sat in a different section, taking notes on her tablet. As humanities expert on alien psychology, she was supposed to figure out how to help humans fit into galactic society. But the more she observed, the more worried she became. Every species she had met so far came from what they called garden worlds, planets with stable weather, abundant food, and few natural disasters. They had never known real hunger. They had never faced extinction. They had never had to choose between survival and morality. The Nefari delegate floating next. To her pulsed with gentle yellow light as it spoke. Your homeworld sounds terrifying. How do your people maintain sanity in such conditions? We help each other, Amy replied. When things get bad, we work together. But surely some individuals must become unstable, violent? How do you handle those who cannot adapt to peaceful cooperation? Amy thought about her answer carefully. We try to help them. But sometimes, people do what they have to do to survive. The Nefari's light shifted to a concerned orange. How troubling. On our world, violence is unknown. Those who show aggressive tendencies are gently corrected through harmony treatments. Amy made another note on her tablet. These beings had no concept of necessary violence. They had never faced a situation where survival required hard choices. The ceremony continued with speeches from various species representatives. Each one welcomed humanity warmly, but with underlying concern. They spoke of helping humans adjust to civilized society. They offered therapy for humanity's trauma responses. They suggested ways to help humans overcome their harsh conditioning. Lisa listened to it all with growing unease. These beings saw humans as damaged goods, survivors of a terrible world, who needed to be fixed before they could join polite society. When it came time for her to speak, Lisa stood at the podium and looked out at hundreds of alien faces. She thought about her words carefully. People of the Galactic Confederation, she began. Humanity thanks you for this welcome. We look forward to learning from your peaceful civilizations. We hope to contribute our own knowledge and abilities to the common good. She paused, then added something not in her prepared speech. We also hope that in time, you will come to understand that what you call our harsh conditioning, we call our strength. Earth taught us that survival requires sacrifice. That peace must sometimes be defended. That the strong protect the weak, even when the weak cannot understand the cost. The hall fell silent. Lisa could see confusion on many alien faces. Others showed what looked like alarm. She smiled gently and finished her speech with the diplomatic words from her briefing. But her real message had been delivered as the ceremony ended and the delegates mingled. Jake Morrison received a priority message on his communicator. Long-range sensors had detected something at the edge of known space. A large fleet of unknown ships moving toward Confederation territory. Jake looked at the message again. The fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, all using technology that didn't match any known species. He found Lisa in the crowd and showed her the message. She read it twice, then looked around at the celebrating aliens. Do we tell them? Jake asked quietly. Lisa watched a group of Villani younglings playing a game that involved gently pushing colored lights around in patterns. She saw Crack's elders sharing what looked like poetry. She observed Nefari families floating together. In perfect harmony. Not yet, she said. Let them enjoy their peace a little longer. But even as she spoke, Lisa knew that humanity's real test was coming. And she suspected that when it arrived, the galaxy would finally understand why death. Worlds produced the species they did. 3 months had passed since the welcome ceremony on Zenturi Prime. Dr. Kevin Walsh sat in the archives of the diplomatic station, scrolling through files that made his stomach turn cold. The Confederation had been very helpful in providing historical records. Too helpful, Kevin thought. He pulled up another file marked Former Member Species Archived. The Tarathi had joined the Confederations 200 years ago. Their homeworld was listed as Class 9 Death World, not as harsh as Earth, but still dangerous. The records showed they had been excellent members for 50 years. Then the files stopped, no mention of where they went. No record of their departure. They simply vanished from all official documents. Kevin found 17 more species with similar patterns. All from death worlds. All disappeared after a few decades of membership. The Confederation's explanation was always the same: relocated, to pursue independent development. But Kevin had found something else. Deep in the military archives, he discovered deployment records that didn't match the official story. Confederation fleets had been sent to escort these species beyond the galactic rim. The language was diplomatic, but Kevin recognized a forced exile when he saw one. He composed a message to Ambassador Hayes, marking it urgent and classified. Captain Ben Carter stood on the training field of Kepler 442b, watching Confederation peacekeepers practice what they called combat exercises. The word combat was generous. The aliens moved like they were dancing, their weapons set to the lowest possible stun settings. When one of them was killed in the simulation, they simply lay down and waited for the exercise to end. "This is how you prepare for battle?" Carter asked Commander Trixvell, a Villani officer. "Battle is an outdated concept," Trixvell replied, his crystal face showing what Carter had learned was confusion. "We engage in conflict resolution." The goal is to minimize harm while establishing peaceful dialogue. Carter watched a squad of Crack's warriors advance on a simulated enemy position. Instead of using cover or tactical movement, they walked straight forward while broadcasting surrender terms. The enemy in this simulation was programmed to accept the terms and lay down weapons. What if the enemy doesn't want to talk? Carter asked. "All rational beings prefer peace to violence," Trixvell said with certainty. "It is simply a matter of finding the right approach." That afternoon, Carter began unauthorized training sessions with the human colonial militia. Sergeant Tony Brooks, who had fought in the resource wars on Earth, helped him set up realistic combat scenarios. "Sir, these colonists need to know how to fight," Brooks said as they watched civilians practice with actual weapons. "This world isn't as dangerous as Earth, but it's still got predators and storms that could kill you. The Confederation doesn't. Like us training with lethal weapons," Carter replied. "They think it encourages aggressive behavior. Let them think that. When trouble comes, we'll be ready." Carter hoped Brooks was wrong about trouble coming, but his soldier's instincts told him otherwise. Ambassador Lisa Hayes read Dr. Walsh's report 3 times before calling an emergency meeting. The small conference room on the diplomatic station felt cramped as she explained what Kevin had discovered. 17 species, she said, looking at the faces of her senior staff, all from death worlds. All disappeared after becoming inconvenient. "Disappeared how?" asked Dr. Amy Richardson. "Exiled beyond the galactic rim," Kevin answered. "The Confederation calls it voluntary relocation for independent development, but the military records tell a different story." Jake Morrison, now promoted to captain, leaned forward. "Are we talking about genocide?" "No," Kevin shook his head. "They were given ships and supplies, told to find new homes outside Confederation space. But the message was clear: leave or be removed." "Why?" Amy asked. "What made them inconvenient?" Kevin pulled up another file. "Look at this." Every species that was exiled had the same pattern. They started questioning Confederation policies. They suggested changes to military doctrine. They proposed stronger defenses against unknown threats. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. They were too aggressive for the Confederation's taste. Or too realistic, Jake added. These garden world species have never faced real danger. They don't want to hear that the universe isn't as safe as they think. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Confederation Council. The message was brief and formal. Humanity was being assigned permanent settlement rights on 3 border worlds. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was clear. "They're putting us on the frontier," Lisa said after reading the message. "As far from their core worlds as possible." "Makes sense," Jake replied grimly. "If something bad happens, we'll be the first to face it." 2 weeks later, the Cracks Collective made their move. A delegation of their highest-ranking hive minds arrived at the Confederation Council with ancient territorial claims. They demanded immediate control of 5 star systems, including 2 that had been promised to human colonists. Ambassador Hayes attended the hearing, but she wasn't allowed to speak. Humanity's probationary status meant they had no voting rights in the council. The Cracks presented their case with typical insect precision. Their ancestors had used those systems as breeding grounds centuries ago. Ancient law gave them precedent over newer members. The council deliberated for less than an hour before ruling in favor of the Cracks. The human colonists would be relocated to less desirable worlds. The decision was final. Lisa stood to object, but Council Speaker Zethka cut her off. Probationary members may observe, but not participate in council decisions. This ruling is based on established precedent and cannot be appealed. That night, Lisa sent an encrypted message to Earth. The response came back within hours. Maintain diplomatic relations. Do not provoke confrontation. Humanity's future depends on Confederation acceptance. But Lisa was beginning to wonder if acceptance was possible, or even desirable. Dr. Amy Richardson spent her time studying the psychology of the Confederation species. What she found disturbed her more than the exile records. These beings had lived in peace for so long that they had lost the ability to recognize real threats. The Valani had eliminated all aggressive behavior from their society through genetic modification. The Nefari had developed harmony treatments that made violence literally impossible for their species. The Cracks had bred out individual thinking in favor of collective decision-making that always chose the path of least resistance. "They've made themselves helpless," Amy wrote in her report. "They can only survive because they've never encountered anything that truly wants to harm them." Her words proved prophetic sooner than she expected. The long-range sensors detected them first. A massive fleet moving through the outer sectors of the galaxy. The ships were unlike anything in Confederation databases. They moved in perfect formation, ignoring all attempts at communication. Captain Carter was conducting training exercises when the alert came through. The unknown fleet had destroyed 3 automated monitoring stations without warning. They were heading directly toward Confederation space. "Sir," Sergeant Brooks called out, "the Confederation's sending a diplomatic mission to make contact." Carter looked at the tactical display showing the approaching fleet. The ships were huge, built for war, not exploration. Their weapon signatures were off the charts. "Get me a direct line to Ambassador Hayes," Carter ordered. When the connection came through, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ma'am, we need to start evacuation procedures." "Whatever's coming, it's not here to talk." "The Confederation says we're overreacting," Lisa replied. "They're confident their diplomats can establish peaceful contact." "With respect, ma'am, the Confederation has never met anyone who didn't want to be peaceful." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "Ben, start preparing defensive positions. Quietly. If I'm wrong, we'll apologize later. And if you're right, then we'll be the only ones ready for what's coming." As the unknown fleet drew closer, humanity made its preparations. The Confederation continued sending diplomatic messages and preparing welcome ceremonies. But in the human colonies, weapons were being checked and defensive positions established. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between those who hoped for peace and those who prepared for war. Dr. Walsh sent one final message to Earth before the communications blackout began. The Confederation archives contain a phrase that appears in connection with every exiled species. Too dangerous for civilized society. I believe we're about to find out why the galaxy needs its dangerous species. The storm was coming, and humanity would face it alone. The first world to die was Zenturi Prime. Captain Jake Morrison watched the reports come in from the bridge of the U.E.'s horizon. The beautiful crystal cities that had amazed humanity just months ago were now rubble and dust. The unknown fleet had arrived without warning and attacked without mercy. "Sir, we're getting evacuation requests from 17 different systems," reported Lieutenant Davis. His voice was tight with fear. "The Confederation Council is calling for immediate assistance." Jake looked at the tactical display. Red markers showed the advancing enemy fleet. They called themselves the Devourers, and their message was simple: surrender or die. "Set course for the nearest evacuation point," Jake ordered, "and send a message to Admiral Cross. Tell her we need every available ship." The Devourers were nothing like the peaceful species of the Confederation. Their ships were black metal monsters covered in weapon ports. They moved through space like predators, hunting down fleeing civilian vessels and destroying them without hesitation. Captain Ben Carter stood in the command center on Kepler 442b, watching the feeds from the fallen worlds. The Vellani had tried to negotiate even as their cities burned. The cracks had sent diplomatic messages until the moment their hive worlds were cracked open like eggs. "They never had a chance," Sergeant Brooks said, standing beside him. "These Devourers don't care about surrender terms or peaceful dialogue." Carter nodded grimly. "They're predators. They see weakness and they attack." The human colony on Kepler 442b was in chaos. Confederation officials were demanding that the humans follow standard evacuation procedures. But Carter knew those procedures would get everyone killed. "Sir," called out Private Lisa Martinez from the communications station, "the Confederation is ordering us to establish a defensive perimeter around the civilian transports. They want us to use minimum force and attempt communication with the enemy." Carter almost laughed. "Minimum force against ships that just destroyed 3 entire star systems? Those are the rules of engagement, sir." Carter looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Devourer scouts. In 6 hours, they would reach Kepler 442b. The Confederation's response was to send a diplomatic team. Sergeant Brooks. Carter called out, "Implement Code Black. All civilians to the underground shelters. All militia units to combat positions." "Sir, the Confederation specifically ordered us not to use lethal preparations." "The Confederation isn't here," Carter replied. "We are." Dr. Amy Richardson was trapped on a transport ship fleeing from the young Nefari gas cities when she saw the Devourers up close for the first time. The enemy boarding party that took over their ship moved with mechanical precision. They were humanoid, but wrong somehow, with 2 long limbs and faces that looked like they had been carved from stone. "Please," begged the Nefari captain, his bioluminescent body pulsing with panic colors. "We offer no resistance. Take what you need and let us go." The Devourer commander looked at him with empty black eyes. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. "We need everything," it said. Then it killed the captain with a weapon that turned living tissue into ash. Amy watched in horror as the Devourers began processing the passengers. They sorted people into groups, some for food, some for slave labor, some for things Amy didn't want to think about. The peaceful Confederation species had no idea how to fight back. They kept trying to negotiate, even as they were dragged away. When the Devourers reached Amy, she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She grabbed a piece of broken metal and drove it into the nearest alien's throat. The Devourer staggered backward, dark blood pouring from the wound. The other Devourers stopped what they were doing and stared at her. "Interesting," said their commander. "A fighter. We haven't seen one of those in this galaxy." Amy stood her ground, still holding the bloody metal shard. "There are more of us than you think. We shall see." Ambassador Lisa Hayes was in an emergency session with the Confederation Council when the news arrived. The Devourers had taken 17 worlds in 3 days. Billions were dead or captured. The Confederation fleets had been swept aside like toys. "We must attempt a peaceful resolution," insisted Council Speaker Zeth Ka. "Perhaps we can negotiate territorial concessions." "They don't want territory," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm. "They want to consume everything in their path." "All species can be reasoned with," replied First Minister Vel Sari. Her crystal body was dim with stress, but her voice remained confident. "We simply need to find the right approach." Lisa looked around the council chamber at the alien faces. Even now, with their worlds burning, they couldn't accept that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with. "What about the human proposals for military preparation?" asked a Krax representative. "Perhaps their aggressive strategies have merit in this situation." The chamber fell silent. Lisa realized this was the first time any Confederation species had suggested that human aggression might be useful. "Humanity is still under probationary status," Zethka replied stiffly. "They lack the experience to advise on galactic security matters." "With respect," Lisa said, standing up. "My species has been dealing with existential threats for our entire history. We know how to fight for survival." "Fighting is not the solution," Velsari insisted. "Violence only breeds more violence." Lisa wanted to scream. Instead, she activated the holographic display and showed them the tactical analysis her people had prepared. "The Devourers aren't interested in coexistence," she explained. "They're a nomadic fleet that strips worlds bare and moves on. They've probably done this to dozens of galaxies before ours." "How can you be certain?" asked another council member. "Because that's what we would do if we were them," Lisa replied bluntly. "That's what any species does when resources become scarce. You adapt, you move, you take what you need to survive." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Lisa had just said something no Confederation species wanted to hear, that survival sometimes required taking from others. Dr. Kevin Walsh had been monitoring Devourer communications from his position on the diplomatic station. What he learned made his blood run cold. The Devourers weren't just random raiders. They were refugees from their own dead galaxy, fleeing something even worse than themselves. "They're running," he told Lisa during an emergency briefing. "Their home galaxy was consumed by something they call the Void Swarm. The Devourers are what's left of billions of species that tried to escape." "That doesn't make them less dangerous," Lisa replied. "No, but it explains their tactics. They're not trying to build an empire. They're trying to gather enough resources to keep running. So what do they need?" Kevin's expression was grim. "Everything. Ships, fuel, technology, population for slave labor. They'll strip this galaxy bare and move on to the next one." Lisa felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The Confederation will never accept that. They'll keep trying to negotiate until there's nothing left to save. "What do we do?" Lisa looked out at the stars where human ships were already moving. "Into position. We do what we always do. We survive." On Kepler 442b, the Devourer scouts arrived ahead of schedule. Captain Carter watched them approach through his binoculars, counting at least 50 small ships moving in perfect formation. The Confederation diplomatic team was broadcasting on all frequencies, offering peace talks and territorial compromises. The Devourers responded by destroying the diplomatic shuttle with a single shot. All units, weapons free, Carter ordered. Engage on sight. The battle for Kepler 442b began with a barrage of missiles launched from hidden positions in the planets. Mountain ranges. Carter had used the natural terrain to his advantage, something the Confederation had never thought to do. The Devourer ships took heavy damage from the ambush, but they adapted quickly. They began systematic bombardment of the human positions, using weapons that turned solid rock into molten glass. Fall back to secondary positions, Carter ordered. Give them the high ground, but make them pay for it. As the human forces retreated deeper into the planet's defensive network, Carter received a message from Admiral Cross. Human reinforcements were on the way, but they were heavily outnumbered. "Sir?" called out Sergeant Brooks. "We're getting reports from the other human colonies. The Devourers are hitting all of them simultaneously." Carter nodded grimly. The enemy had learned from their mistakes. They weren't giving humanity time to coordinate a defense, but they had underestimated what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. "Send a message to all human forces," Carter ordered. "Tell them this is what we trained for. This is why Earth made us strong." The message went out across human space. Never again will we go quietly. Never again will we surrender without a fight. The galaxy's garden worlds had taught humanity many things about peace and cooperation. But now it was time for the Death World species to teach them about war. Admiral Nancy Cross stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the last Confederation battle fleet retreat towards Zenturi Prime. Half their ships were destroyed or crippled. The survivors limped through space like wounded animals. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender transmissions from the Crack's Third Fleet," reported Commander Steve Wallace. "They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Nancy looked at the tactical display. The Devourers had broken through every defensive line the Confederation had established. In 2 weeks, they had conquered or destroyed 40 star systems. The galaxy's peaceful civilizations were collapsing faster than anyone had imagined possible. "Signal the crack ships," Nancy ordered. "Tell them to follow our retreat vector. We'll cover their withdrawal." "Admiral," called out Captain Janet Rodriguez from the communications station, "we're getting priority messages from Earth Command. They're ordering us to fall back to human space and establish defensive positions." Nancy read the message twice. Earth wanted humanity to abandon the Confederation and protect only their own colonies. It made military sense, but Nancy had seen what the Devourers did to captured populations. "Send a reply to Earth Command," she said finally. "Tell them we're implementing Strategic Option 7. Commander Wallace looked confused. "Mom, there is no Strategic Option 7. "There is now," Nancy replied grimly. "We're going to buy the Confederation time to evacuate their civilians, even if it costs U.S. everything." On the surface of Kepler 442b, Captain Ben Carter crouched in a bombed-out building and watched Devourer ground forces advance through the ruins of New Seattle. The human colony had held out for 6 days against impossible odds, but they were running out of ammunition and people. "Sir, we've got movement in Sector 7, whispered Sergeant Brooks through the com. "Looks like a full assault company." Carter checked his rifle and counted his remaining magazines. 3 left. The Devourers had adapted to human tactics faster than he had hoped. They learned from every engagement, becoming more efficient with each battle. "All units, prepare for final defensive action," Carter transmitted. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every civilian that gets away while we hold the line." Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos had taken command of the moon bases orbiting Kepler 442b when the planetary defense grid was destroyed. Her Marines were dug into the lunar surface, using the low gravity and unstable geology as weapons against The Devourer landing forces. Detonate charges in Tunnel Complex Delta, she ordered. Bring the whole section down on them. The explosion shook the entire moon, collapsing 3 kilometers of underground passages and burying a Devourer mechanized unit. It was the kind of tactic that made Confederation observers sick to watch, but it was keeping the evacuation ships alive. "Colonel," called out Sergeant Mike Patterson, "we're down to our last demolition charges. After this, we're fighting with small arms only." Maria looked at the tactical display, showing dozens of Devourer ships landing on the moon's surface. Her 300 Marines were facing an invasion force of thousands. "Then we make every shot count," she replied. Dr. Amy Richardson had been rescued from the captured transport and brought to the Zenturi system along with other refugees. She was working in the emergency medical stations when she met Dr. Nethvox, a Velani physician who had fled from his homeworld. "I don't understand," Nethvox said as they treated wounded civilians. "Why do the humans continue fighting when the situation is hopeless? Their colonies are lost. Their fleets are outnumbered. Logic suggests immediate surrender would minimize casualties." Amy looked up from the crack soldier she was treating. The insect warrior had lost 3 limbs defending an evacuation ship, but he would live. "Because surrender means extinction," she replied. "The Devourers don't take prisoners for long. They use people up and throw them away. But surely some accommodation could be reached, some form of coexistence." Amy showed him the intelligence reports human ships had gathered, images of stripped worlds, empty of all life. Recordings of Devourer communications that spoke of harvesting and processing captured populations. "They're not interested in coexistence," Amy explained. "They're running from something worse than themselves, and they'll do anything to keep running, including consuming us." Nethvox studied the reports with growing horror. These beings have no concept of mercy or restraint. "No," Amy agreed. "That's why the only option is to fight until we can't fight anymore." Ambassador Lisa Hayes stood before the emergency session of the Confederation Council as reports of the human stand Kepler 442b reached Zenturi Prime. The human forces were buying precious time for evacuation fleets, but the cost was enormous. "The humans are sacrificing themselves for us," said First Minister Valsari, her crystal body pulsing with distress. "They're dying to protect species that treated them as second-class members." Council Speaker Zethka's expression was troubled. "Perhaps we misjudged their nature. We saw their capacity for violence as a flaw, but now you see it's what survival looks like," Lisa finished. "My people aren't violent because we enjoy it. We're violent because the universe taught us that sometimes violence is the only way to protect what matters." A Cracks representative stepped forward. "What do the humans want in return for their sacrifice?" Lisa had prepared for this question. Full membership in the Confederation, equal voting rights, and a promise that never again will Death World species be exiled for being too dangerous. The council chamber fell silent. They were being asked to embrace the very thing they had always rejected, the idea that some problems could only be solved through force. "If we agree to these terms," Zethka asked slowly, "what assurance do we have that humanity won't become a threat to peaceful civilizations?" Lisa looked around the chamber at the faces of beings whose worlds were being consumed while they debated. "Because we're not fighting for conquest. We're fighting for the right of civilizations to exist. All civilizations, even ones that don't understand the cost of that right." Admiral Cross received the Council's decision as her fleet prepared for what everyone knew would be a final battle. The Devourers were massing at the edge of the Zenturi system. Every human ship that could still fight was moving to intercept them. "Full Confederation membership and equal status," she read aloud to her bridge crew. "They're also offering us territorial concessions and reparations for our losses." "That's generous of them," commented Commander Wallace dryly. "It doesn't matter," Nancy replied. "Win or lose, this changes everything. The galaxy finally understands that peace isn't free." The human fleet formed up in the asteroid belt surrounding Zenturi Prime, 47 ships against more than 300 Devourer vessels. The math was simple and brutal. "All ships, this is Admiral Cross," Nancy broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Today we fight not just for humanity, but for the idea that civilized beings deserve to live in peace. The Confederation species behind us have never known war, never faced extinction, never had to choose between survival and morality. That's not their weakness. It's what we're fighting to preserve." She paused, looking at the approaching enemy. "Fleet, Earth taught us that survival requires sacrifice, that the strong protect the weak, even when the weak can't understand the cost. Today, we prove that lesson to an entire galaxy." The Devourer fleet began its final advance. Their ships moved in perfect formation, weapons charging for the kill. They had conquered 40 star systems and faced no real resistance. They expected this battle to be like all the others. They had never fought a Death World species before. The human fleet met them in the asteroid field, using the tumbling rocks as cover and weapons. Ships that would have retreated in any sane tactical situation instead accelerated toward the enemy, their crews singing old Earth songs about standing against the dark. Captain Jake Morrison, commanding the UES Horizon, rammed his damaged ship into a Devourer battlecruiser rather than let it reach the evacuation ships. His last transmission was simple: never again. Lieutenant Colonel Santos detonated the remaining nuclear charges on Kepler 442b's moon, taking out a Devourer staging area and her remaining Marines. Her final words were recorded by the evacuation ships: "Tell them we held the line." Captain Carter and his surviving troops fought room by room through the ruins of New Seattle until their ammunition ran out. Then they fought with knives and bare hands until the Devourers stopped trying to take prisoners. The human fleet was destroyed, but they had broken the Devourer advance. For the first time in their conquest of the galaxy, the invaders had been stopped by sheer determination and the willingness to pay any price for victory. As the last human ship died in fire and vacuum, Admiral Cross sent a final message to the Confederation fleet waiting behind Zenturi Prime: "The line holds. Make it count." The galaxy had learned what a Death World species could do when everything they cared about was threatened. The lesson would not be forgotten. 6 months after the Battle of Zenturi Prime, Ambassador Lisa Hayes stood before the rebuilt Confederation Council. The chamber looked different now. Memorials to the fallen worlds lined the walls, and new security measures were visible everywhere. The galaxy had learned that peace required constant vigilance. The final casualty reports had been compiled, Lisa announced to the assembled representatives. Of the 200,000 humans who came to the galaxy seeking membership, fewer than 50,000 survived the war against the Devourers. A silence in the chamber was heavy. Every species present owed their existence to those lost numbers. Council Speaker Zethka, his blue skin bearing new scars from the evacuation of his homeworld, spoke carefully. "Ambassador Hayes, the Confederation wishes to formally apologize for our treatment of humanity. We failed to understand the value of your people's experience." "Apologies won't bring back the dead," Lisa replied quietly, "but understanding might prevent future deaths." She activated the holographic display, showing the aftermath of the Devourer invasion. 43 star systems had been completely stripped of life. 17 more were severely damaged. The proud civilizations that had welcomed humanity with condescension were now scattered refugees in their own galaxy. "The Devourers have been stopped, but not destroyed," Lisa continued. "Our intelligence suggests they're regrouping beyond the galactic rim, searching for easier targets. They'll be back when they think we've grown soft again. First Minister Velsari, her crystal form now bearing battle damage that she wore like medals, leaned forward. "What do you propose we do?" "We prepare," Lisa said simply. "We build defenses. We train for war while hoping for peace. And most importantly, we never again exile those species willing to stand guard in the dark." Dr. Kevin Walsh had been promoted to Director of Historical Analysis for the new Confederation Defense Council. His office overlooked the memorial gardens where the names of every human who died in the war were carved in stone from Earth. He was reviewing reports from the outer colonies when Dr. Amy Richardson arrived with news that would change everything. "We've been monitoring the deep space communication arrays," Amy said, setting down a datapad. "We're picking up response signals to the broadcasts humanity sent during the war." Kevin looked at the readings. The signals were coming from beyond the galactic rim, from regions that had been considered empty space. Response signals to what broadcasts? The ones Captain Carter and Admiral Cross sent before they died. The messages calling for other death. World species to stand together against the darkness. Kevin felt his heart race. "Are you saying there are other species like us out there?" "Not just species," Amy replied. "Entire fleets. The exiled races that the Confederation banished over the centuries. They're still alive, and they've been building something." The first ship arrived 3 weeks later. It was massive, clearly. Built for war, with hull designs that showed the influence of a dozen different species working together. When it broadcast its identification, the Confederation Council was stunned into silence. "This is the Tarathi battleship Endurance, speaking for the Alliance of the Exiled. We received humanity's call. We've come home." Captain Elena Foster, one of the few surviving human fleet officers, was assigned to the first contact team. She met the Tarathi commander on a neutral station at the edge of Confederation space. Commander Fraktor was a 7-foot-tall humanoid with green scales and eyes that had seen too much combat. His species had been exiled from the Confederation 150 years ago for being too militaristic. "Your people fought well," Fraktor said, reviewing the battle reports from the war. "They died like warriors should, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves." "They died because the Confederation was unprepared for reality," Elena replied. "How many of you are out there?" 17 species in the Alliance, Fraktor answered. "All exiled for being too dangerous for civilized society. We've spent our banishment building ships and preparing for the day when the galaxy would need us again." "And now that day has come?" Fraktor gestured toward the tactical displays showing the current state of Confederation space. "The Devourers were just the beginning. There are worse things in the dark between galaxies. The Garden Worlds have been lucky for too long." Over the following months, more ships arrived. The Kethver, exiled for their excessive aggression in defending smaller species. The Drakmari, banished for refusing to submit to Confederation weapon restrictions. The Gorvani, cast out for their disturbing military innovations. Each species brought their own skills and technologies, all refined by decades of survival in the harsh regions beyond civilized space. Together, they represented a military force that dwarfed anything the Confederation had ever imagined. Dr. Walsh compiled their stories into a report that he titled The Price of Paradise. It detailed how the Confederation had systematically removed every species capable of effective defense, preferring the illusion of permanent peace to the reality of necessary vigilance. For 300 years, he wrote, the Confederation chose comfort over security. They exiled their guardians and convinced themselves that the universe was fundamentally peaceful. A Devourer invasion proved that assumption wrong at a cost of billions of lives. The integration of the exiled species into Confederation space was not easy. Many of the Garden World civilizations were terrified by their new protectors. The weapons and tactics that had saved them from the Devourers seemed almost as frightening as the enemy they had defeated. Ambassador, Hayes found herself mediating between species that had forgotten how to coexist with warriors and warriors who had learned not to trust those they protected. "The Velani are afraid of us," reported General Mark Thompson, the new human military liaison. "They see our weapons and our training exercises, and they remember that we could destroy them if we chose to." "Good," Lisa replied, surprising him. "Fear breeds respect, and respect leads to understanding. They need to understand that peace isn't the natural state of the universe. It's something that has to be fought for and defended." The new Confederation Charter was signed 1 year after the end of the Devourer War. It included provisions that would have been unthinkable before the invasion. Military service was now mandatory for all member species. Weapon development was encouraged rather than restricted. And most importantly, Death World species were given permanent seats on the Defense Council with veto power over security decisions. Lisa gave the final speech at the signing ceremony, standing before representatives of 43 species, including 17 that had been exiled and were now returning as saviors. "Today we acknowledge a truth that took the loss of 43 star systems to learn," she began. "Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of strength sufficient to deter those who would destroy what we've built." She paused, looking at the faces of beings who had learned hard lessons about survival. The phrase "never again" has become our watchword. Never again will we exile those willing to stand guard in the dark. Never again will we mistake peaceful intentions for peaceful reality. And never again will we forget that the price of civilization is eternal vigilance. The Confederation had been transformed. Where once Garden World species had governed through consensus and compromise, now Death World veterans shared power and phone responsibility. Military bases were established on the frontier. Deep space monitoring networks watched for new threats. Combat training became part of every citizen's education, but perhaps most importantly, the galaxy had learned to value its monsters. The species that had once been considered too dangerous for civilized society were now recognized as civilization's essential guardians. Dr. Amy Richardson established the Institute for Death World Studies, dedicated to understanding how harsh environments created the psychological resilience necessary for survival. Her research showed that aggression, when properly channeled, was not a flaw to be corrected, but a tool essential for protecting peaceful societies. The Garden Worlds created beauty, art, philosophy, and literature, she wrote in her final report. But Death Worlds created the warriors who ensured that beauty would survive. Both are necessary for a truly complete civilization. 5 years after the Devourer War, long-range sensors detected new signals from beyond the galactic rim. Not the Devourers returning, but something else entirely. Something that made the Devourers look like a minor threat. When the alert reached the Defense Council, Admiral Cross's replacement, Admiral John Peterson, simply nodded and activated the fleet mobilization protocols. "Signal the Alliance fleets," he ordered. "Tell them we have contact with a new threat." "What should we tell the civilian populations?" asked his aide. Peterson looked out at the memorial gardens where the names of humanity's war dead reminded everyone of the cost of being unprepared. "Tell them the truth," he said, "that the universe is a dangerous place, but we're ready for it this time." The galaxy had learned its lesson. Peace was precious precisely because it was fragile, and those willing to fight to protect it deserved honor, not exile. The Death World species had come home to stay, and the galaxy was stronger for it. Never again would they face the darkness alone.